You're live.
Hello, I'm Dr. Mike Caller. I'm a faculty member in the LSU Ag Center, and we're here tonight to talk about Louisiana Lunkers. I'm going to introduce Colleen Walsh. She's a graduate student here in the Ag Center and Louisiana State University, whose focus of her research is on largemouth bass and specifically largemouth bass genetics. But she's going to take over in a few minutes. Prior to her taking over, I want to talk a little bit about the history of largemouth bass research here at Louisiana State University Ag Center. The program goes all the way back to 1982, if you can believe it. The State Department of Wildlife and Fisheries approached us about, not us, I of course wasn't here at the time, but approached the Ag Center about helping them understand the impacts and efficiency of their stocking program. In other words, if they were going to stock largemouth bass to improve fishing, and specifically to make bass bigger. This has always been the goal, and I'm going to keep emphasizing that. As an angler, particularly someone who loves to fish for bass, I've fished for bass my whole life in many states. The goal always has been, I want the big one. Not the long, skinny one, not the one that, is got the sunken belly and they're starving looking. We all want the one that's long and girthy. The big ones. So the whole point of the stocking program was to increase the opportunity for anglers to catch those big bass that everyone wants to catch. And the idea has always been to introduce genetics from the Florida substrain of largemouth bass, which have a maximum potential size that is larger than the endemic northern strain largemouth bass. By stocking these Florida strain largemouth bass, there's an opportunity to catch the fish that are stocked, but also the hybrid offspring of the Florida bass and the native northern bass, which should also carry that ability to get to a larger size. So from 1982 until about 6 years ago, we examined the stocking program by looking at the proportion of Florida bass, hybrid bass between the Florida and northern bass in different lakes throughout the state by looking at liver proteins, because there are proteins that are expressed in the liver differently for the bass that carry Florida genes, bass that carry northern genes, and bass that carry both genes. It was quick.
Hang on. We're reconnecting. Sorry. Wireless dropped for a second. Yep, we're good.
It was quick, it was efficient, and it allowed us to look at thousands of bass a year to look at how they grew in length and especially girth for that idea of getting bigger bass. And we were able to help the state understand its stocking program, to look at places where the stocking had led to larger bass. Over the years, we've looked at trophy bass that were submitted by anglers, and we found that most of those trophy bass were indeed that hybrid mix. But about 6 years ago, we changed techniques to go from that liver protein-based techniques to actually using the DNA of the fish. And what that allowed us to do is, instead of putting fish in three categories, mostly northern, hybrid, or Florida, we could actually look at the whole range of possibilities. So we could put them in a percentage, what percentage of Florida they are, what percentage of northern they are, and that gave us a much finer ability to understand what was going on with the stocking of these Florida bass, how they were mixing with the native bass, and how the resulting offspring were growing. And this is where Colleen's research kicks in. She is using this more modern technique to understand the stocking program, and I'll let her take over for a few minutes and share what she's learned by looking at this more modern technique.
So thank you for that, Dr. Caller. So we use this DNA thing, they're called microsatellites. And so that way, as Dr. Caller said, we're able to assign a percent Florida genes to each specific fish. So now we don't have to say, well, we thought that this might have been a northern, we thought this might have been a Florida. Now we can say specifically this fish contains this percentage of Florida genes. And we can use that to help determine what is the genetic composition of stocks across the state. So we can assign a mean or average percent Florida genes to each lake. And then from there, we can look at differences across lakes and hopefully relate those to, to habitat characteristics. Can we explain why we have lakes across the state that contain a higher average percent Florida genes than other lakes? And we want to directly relate that to habitat so we can try to focus our stocking specifically on those areas to try to create, like Dr. Caller said, those longer, fatter, girthy fish, because that's what we care about. We want to catch those lunkers.
Cool.
So with that said, there's no magic formula that comes out of this kind of research. We can't say to a landowner or to someone going to a public water body, look, if you have this particular set of characteristics, this kind of aquatic vegetation, this kind of depth, these kind of water characteristics, that you're always going to get large bass. That isn't possible with any scientific technique. But we can tell you tendencies. We can tell you these kind of places combined with stocking can give you larger bass. We can't.
Yeah, so that's the takeaway too. That it's not just genetics alone that are going to influence the growth of these fish. So we could have, you could have a fish that is highly Florida, but if it's in a less than ideal environment, the habitat is going to play a larger role in influencing the growth of that fish. So like Dr. Caller said, we can give, places that, things like places like these places, we're likely to have large bass. So.
But none of this connects to your ability to catch them. And let's be honest, we all know that there are fish we're not catching.
Absolutely.
We all know that we could create the best habitat, we could stock with the best genetics, get these great mixtures of fish that have the ability to get to really large sizes. But we can't help you catch them. And I wish I had the breakthrough for that, because I'd like to catch more big bass myself. That's just going to be time and experience. But this type of research can help you target places that you're more likely to find those fish, and then by using your own skills and experiences, catch those fish. Mm-hmm. So when we think about places that, if you wanted to go to a public water body like Lake Rodemacher or Lake Darbone or Poverty Point Reservoir, in places that we know that these bass could be or are likely to be, you're going to want to look for places with aquatic vegetation, primarily native aquatic vegetation. You want to avoid places with a lot of invasive aquatic vegetation. You're going to
also want to, on that note with the aquatic vegetation, you want to make sure that you're not going to a place that's completely, for lack of vegged out. You still want to have, there can't be too much vegetation.
Yeah.
So it's the Goldilocks idea that you want to make sure you're not going to a completely bare lake, but also a lake that's not completely covered in vegetation either.
You have to think about it. The bass has to get through there.
Mm-hmm. They have to be able to see. If it's completely vegetation, they're not going to be able to see other prey items to be able to eat to get bigger. And that's the idea. A bass that's eating other fish is going to get big.
And so another thing that our research has suggested is that lakes with highly developed shorelines, with lots of docks and bulwarks, aren't necessarily where you're going to get the biggest bass. Their bass are territorial, right? They do like to associate with cover. They like to be by structures, but they need access to those vegetation beds for foraging, for predator avoidance, for resting areas. So a lake where the vegetation has been completely replaced with man-made structures, although you can catch them from there, and we all have, that isn't where you're going to get optimal conditions for getting the biggest bass, at least based on our research. Mm-hmm. Another thing to consider is the idea of water quality. So we know that we have to breathe air. We're looking for the oxygen in the air. Fish are the same. They have to get oxygen out of the water. Very low levels of dissolved oxygen are going to limit bass growth. They're going to be stressed. They're going to avoid those locations. And if the entire lake or a big part of the lake is experiencing low dissolved oxygen, that's not going to be the place where the biggest bass are going to be. The biggest bass, again, return that they're territorial and they have behavior. They're going to claim the best spots. Mm-hmm. So if you find a part of a lake that is lower in dissolved oxygen, that doesn't have great water quality and water chemistry, that's going to be where the less optimal bass are going to be, if there's any at all. Mm-hmm. So if there's opportunities to aerate, to improve dissolved oxygen, to reduce invasive species, because invasive species reduce dissolved oxygen, especially invasive aquatic plant species, those are good steps that people can take to improve fishing in a public lake, or if they're a private landowner, they need to be particularly aware of dissolved oxygen and aquatic invasive plants, because small water bodies can quickly be overrun by aquatic invasive plants. And if those aquatic invasive plants overrun your small water body, it's going to bring down the dissolved oxygen. It's really going to limit the bass. No matter how many Florida bass you stock, if the habitat isn't optimal, they're not going to optimize their growth capacity.
And I think that's a large take home to remember, that no matter how many fish you stock, if you're not stocking an ideal habitat, you're not going to see the results that you're really trying to aim for with getting these larger trophy fish that we all would like to catch.
So Colleen, when you're thinking about the bass you've studied, what was the coolest thing a bass ate?
So this, I had a comment on this one on the Facebook post. That picture of me with over a cut open bass was a turtle shell that I found in one of my bass stomachs, and that was probably the neatest thing that I got to find. Immediately when I pulled the fish up and grab it, I was like, ooh, there's something in here, and it's hard. Crawfish are pretty common, but this one I knew wasn't a crawfish. I've also found some pieces of plastic in my bass stomachs, which is not the best find, but also notable that pollution will make its way up to these top predators, and that's important to be thinking about whenever you're out fishing. If you see something, pick it up. We caught a bunch of large fish. That was probably the coolest things, was just getting giant fish that hadn't been digested yet. Stomachs were probably my favorite thing to look through because we got a lot of neat stuff in bass stomachs.
Now, Colleen, did you see many diseased fish or fish that exhibited signs of parasites?
Yes, I would say so. So we live in a warm water state, so parasites are really prevalent here. Pretty much every fish that I cut open had some form of parasite, whether that be a gill parasite or a liver parasite. But again, bass in Louisiana are really healthy, so it appears that while parasites are really prevalent among our fish, that they really don't negatively impact bass health overall. But yes, parasites are really common here, and that's just I guess another sign to make sure that you fully cook your fish, whatever fish, any fish that you catch in freshwater in Louisiana, you need to make sure it's fully cooked.
Can you tell me about that jar?
This jar, okay, so here we have a jar of, these are actually largemouth bass here. These were collected from Beaver Creek in 2000. It's just a jar of largemouth bass.
So it's here for teaching purposes. Here in the School of Renewable Natural Resources, which is part of the LSU Ag Center, we have an undergraduate program and graduate program in natural resources. Our undergraduate program is natural resources ecology and management, and we have a graduate degrees in master's and PhD in renewable natural resources. And within that program, there are students who are studying fish and fisheries, as well as students studying wildlife ecology and forestry and wetlands. But we have specimens here, and some specimens we'll show you later, that are here for teaching purposes.
So this is how I learned how to identify fish, was looking at a jar of fish like this and learning how to count lateral line scales or fin rays. And we have a whole room of specimens like this. One of the reasons I switched into this department was seeing this specimen room and all the things that I could study here.
So many people have wondered, what bass am I actually catching? If you go fishing in Louisiana and you catch a bass and you look at it, there are some differences as you travel across the state. When you go into the coastal marshes, you're going to get these short, football-shaped, really bronze-looking bass that are very distinctive looking. And then as you travel, say, into the Atchafalaya Swamp, you're going to get bass that are going to be a little bit greener. Mm-hmm. They're going to have that characteristic black marking on the side. As you go north, you might see a little bit more of that. And that is a combination of food and water clarity and some habitat characteristics, but there's also a genetic component to that. As populations, particularly if we think about our marsh bass populations, are a little bit more isolated from other populations, they pass those characteristics on. You can think of it like, breeds of dogs, they pass characteristics on. Florida bass versus northern bass can, with training and luck and a lot of experience.
Luck is the big one.
You can tell them apart by counting fins and looking at rays.
However, you reach issues with that when you're looking at hybrid fish. So a hybrid fish could either exhibit the fin ray number of a northern or a Florida. So really the only true way to identify what kind of bass you caught, whether it's a northern, a Florida, or a hybrid, is through genetic identification.
However, we can't do gene testing at home. So as an angler, you might wonder, well, is there a way for me to know if the lake I'm going to or the river I'm going to go to fish, if I could make an educated guess? And so for most water bodies in the state, there are lake reports available from the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries that has data on the percent composition of Florida, northern, and hybrid bass that you might find in that lake, based on the work we do and to provide them with information. So you could find a lake like Poverty Point that has a large percentage of Florida and hybrid bass, likely that's what you're catching. So that's one way you can figure out what you're catching, but the only other way is to do a kind of costly and expensive genetic analyses. And for most people, we probably don't need to know that. If you're catching bass that you're happy with and you're satisfied with, and you're having a good time, you could probably decide to tell yourself whatever it is. But if you are really curious, contact your local your state district fisheries biologist and ask, I go to this water body, what am I likely to be getting? And they'll give you some probabilities, and they'll say, in this particular water body, it's probably 80% likely to be a hybrid or 10% likely to be a Florida. And, that could be an interesting thing for you to do if you're curious about it. But as far as the genetic identification, please don't send us samples. We have a lot of work. We already have a lot of work to do, and it is not a free enterprise. But
that, and it's a complicated process. As we talked about previously, it used to be how we previously looked at those liver enzymes. It was only 2 of them. We didn't have to extract DNA, and you could get it done in an afternoon. Our new technology, microsatellites, we're looking at 12 specific locations on a bass genome, and it takes a lot more time to process that than it does to do the livers. We have to extract DNA. It's a whole process. So while it takes a lot longer for us to be able to assign a genetic identity to these fish, we're getting information that is a lot more informative than what we were previously getting with just looking at 2 different liver enzymes. We're able to now say, we know that this fish is 73% Florida bass, when earlier we could say, well, we think it's a Florida.
So where are y'all going, with the research? What's coming next?
So the next big questions are, we have from Colleen's research some indications that certain habitat components are probably more important than others. And they affect bass at different levels of introgression or mixing of the genetics. So it appears that fish that are fully or almost fully Florida and fish that are almost fully northern are reacting to habitat in 2 very different ways. Fish that are mixtures are also interacting with habitat in what appears to be 2 different ways. Mm-hmm. So there's 4 different interactions with habitat going on. So we're going to work on refining that further. We also are trying to understand their growth rates. Right now, Colleen's data are largely limited to fish from age 1 through 3. So we're seeing this initial difference in growth rates, but we really don't have the old geezers. And so
those are going to be the trophy fish that people are interested in.
Yeah, the next step in this research is to go back to Department of Wildlife and Fisheries older data and see if we can figure out the patterns in the older data on with these old fish to see if we can elucidate those growth patterns. But really what's likely going to happen is we're going to have to specifically go out and look for old fish and get some of these Methuselahs that are out there and find out, and then go back and figure out what their genetics are and figure out how long it took them to get to these various sizes, so that we can start saying that if you want really large trophy fish that are really, the ability to live a long time, what are the habitats that got them there, what allowed them to grow that big, and then can we go and implement those habitat characteristics on the land, on the waterscape? Is that practical to do? And also, one of my personal interests is to provide practical management and guidance to pond owners. Mm-hmm. A lot of us love to fish our large public water bodies. Rodemacher, Caney, Poverty Point, we love it, right? Toledo Bend. But there's thousands of people in this state that have ponds. And it's something that I'm personally interested in doing, is try to translate our research into something that's practical for a pond landowner. And practical. It's one thing for me to say, make your dissolved oxygen better. Well, yeah, you don't for many landowners, we don't even know what it is. So instead, I want to think about things that are practical to do, like increase aeration, decrease aquatic nuisance plants, focus on promoting native plant beds that oxygenate the water and increase habitat. Focus on things that are practical for that pond owner or the family that's got that lake they like to go to at grandma and grandpa's. What can they do to make that better? Because I think there's an opportunity for engaging more of the public in providing more value for the research that we're doing if we can get this sort of large lake research done and scale it down to the small pond owner.
Clay says, let me know where the old fish are at.
Well, the old fish are old for a reason.
There's a reason that a fish can grow so old. I mean, it's like fool me once, shame on you, or shame on me, you know. So
let's think about these bass, right? They're largely visual predators. If you think about these bass, this guy right here, they got big, has been through. That bass is probably 3 to 4, maybe 5 years old.
3 or 4. 3 or 4. I wouldn't say 5.
Right.
3 or 4.
So these bigger bass that live longer are not getting caught. They're not getting consumed by predators. So although we typically think of bass as crepuscular feeders, so they feed mostly in the morning and mostly in the evening in low light where they have a visual advantage over their prey. And I'm not telling something that most anglers don't already know this, but the science guys are saying the same thing. But the reason is they just see better in those situations. There are some bass that learn to be truly nocturnal. And data over the years from other states have shown that these bass that learn to be more effective feeding at night, avoiding people, are the old geezers. And so our primary way of collecting bass for research purposes is electrofishing. We put electricity in the water, usually from a boat. It's most effective in shallow habitats. We typically do it during the day. So we tend to miss those old guys. So we can either try to electrofish a little deeper where they're hiding during the day, or we can use all other methodologies. And in this next set of research, we're going to try to rely on some other methodologies to fish a little bit deeper and get them during the day while we're out there, or do some overnight sampling. I don't particularly like night sampling because you tend to run into things. It's hard to see. You miss a lot of fish because it's dark.
It's a lot easier to see a fish during the day than it is at night if it comes up.
But we're going to have to work a little bit harder to find those fish, and it's probably going to involve a little bit more sampling at night.
But that's what people are interested in.
Yeah.
So it's what we want. It's what we're interested in too. I want to know where these big fish are. I get just as much pleasure about getting a big fish in my sample than catching a big fish an angler would. So.
So, any other questions popping up?
Connor says Dr. Keller is the best. He just added that in there. Connor Gilbert, I believe.
Connor, yeah.
It's fine, Connor. We had classes together.
We do have a class here at LSU, if I can plug it, that I do teach scientific fish capture and handling. Cool. We also have a wildlife version of that Dr. Brett Collier teaches. Mm-hmm. So these are classes where we're preparing the next generation of scientists and fish and managers so that they can learn how to use the equipment, go out on the boats, set the nets, and also how to handle fish in ways that you can actually return them with low mortality, or how you would measure them, how you would keep them for other projects. So that is something that I've always enjoyed. I get to do the best of both worlds. I get to do the science, but I also get to work with all these cool students. So thinking again about those lunkers, that's really what this whole talk is about. That's what the whole purpose of this research is about.
Absolutely.
If we could figure out where they live on a highly reliable, high confidence basis, we would tell you. I would publish that paper and become the most famous bass scientist ever.
I know. I'm not trying to keep it a secret. I'm not trying to keep it a secret because I want to be able to tell people where they can catch the biggest bass, but there's only a certain level of confidence that I can provide.
Yeah. But we can tell you, and we will, in the Colleen's research and the research we're doing here is released through Ag Center Communications, it's released through scientific publications, it's released through events like this. We'll tell you where we think you would be best, where your highest chances are. And that's the best we can do for you, is give you those opportunities to go out and catch fish. So I think that Colleen's research is very promising. It's evolving. It's not quite done yet. We're still working on it. So her research will be finished up probably this summer. We have another set of projects coming up, as we mentioned earlier, and we're going to keep providing this information to anglers and other interested people about this really cool fish that isn't just fun to catch, but in many places, it's one of the top predators in those ecosystems. And just from an ecological standpoint, they're just a really interesting
They're just
organism.
neat. They're neat fish. Bass are neat.
Ken said, good stuff. Any recommendations for more information on this topic, links, etc.?
We can possibly put those in a follow-up.
Yeah, I'll put them in the comments after the live is over.
Yeah. So I think that there's sometimes people talk kind of down about the popular press in fishing magazines and websites, but actually they're full of really practical information. So one of the things I always recommend when I talk to landowners or people that like to fish is to have a logbook, to record lengths and weights of the fish you catch on the days you catch them, write down the conditions, because our memories are flawed. We tend to remember the really good days and the really bad days. And so if you really like to fish, or you're just someone who's interested in the local ecosystems that you're around, write down what you see as detailed as you can. And then there's some really simple calculations that you can do that these websites like Pond Boss can talk about, and others, and we also have them available for Ag Center pond guides and things. You can calculate some measurements that tell you about the health of this fish, and you can then look over time in your logbook, are these fish getting better or are these fish getting worse?
And as a pond owner, that's a notable thing to. That's something notable to know about your stock. Or do you have a healthy bass population? So that's good advice.
If you're going to a place, like if you're fishing the Chaffalay River, if you're fishing in Henderson Lake and you fish there for a couple years, and you keep this logbook and you notice that the fish you're catching are either getting bigger or getting smaller, that's telling you might need to go find a new place to fish. It's also something you might want to share with your district fisheries biologist, who we appreciate that information, because that kind of knowledge is really helpful for us, because we can't be everywhere. I mean, this project was done not just by Colleen and I. There were several others involved, but there's only 5 or 6 of us. We can't be everywhere. Your state biologist can't be everywhere. So by keeping good records and noting changes over time and giving us a heads up, you can help us see what's going wrong. I mean, that's really important, but also are places getting better? That is also some good feedback to hear, because again, we can't be everywhere, we can't see everything. Input from anglers and interested citizens is always welcome.
Where can they contact you for that? I can put it in the comments later.
Put that in the comments.
Chad's asking, which invasive species should we focus on most? And then he said, and why is it nutria?
Oh, well, so from a largemouth bass perspective, we're really concerned about hyacinth, hydrilla, and giant sylvania. And we're concerned about them for a couple different reasons, but the primary reason is the negative effect they have on dissolved oxygen and water quality. If a fish can't breathe, it can't grow. If a fish can't breathe, it can't reproduce. If a fish can't breathe, it can't stay there.
And same with the idea of feeding. If you're having a lot of these invasives can overrun a pond or a lake really quickly. And so if you don't do any invasive control, a bass is not going to be able to feed efficiently. They're not going to be able to find enough prey items to be able to get larger. And so it's this idea of, if you have too many invasive plants, you're impacting bass on a couple different ways.
So giant sylvania and hyacinth have this shading effect that they do. And so the water underneath becomes very low in dissolved oxygen. It doesn't support phytoplankton. It doesn't support insects and crustaceans that small bass would eat. Hydrilla, on the other hand, isn't necessarily a big problem when it's less dense, but it never stays less dense. And that's the issue. You never just have a little bit of hydrilla. It's like you never have a few cockroaches. You never have a few termites in your wall. You go from none to a lot.
Yeah, a ton.
And so things that you can do to promote native plants like kabamba and ceratophyllum, those plants space themselves out better. Their architecture is such that small bass and forage can move around in them, and big bass can forage in them. Those are the things you want. Now, control of aquatic invasive species is probably a good different live stream for a couple other experts to gather, but I can tell you this: it would be very difficult in this state to have quality fishing with rampant aquatic invasive plants.
Ken's asking, we have a ton of turtles and garfish in our 3-acre pond. Is that bad?
A ton is a difficult number for me to wrap my head around, but but I think I probably use it the same way as Ken does. Gar are competitors for bass, right? They're both top predators, but they forage in different ways and they forage in different habitats.
Absolutely.
So gar are not necessarily going to be an issue. This is a great time for a logbook to record the gar you see, the bass you're catching, and look at those trends over time. And what I mean over time is over a couple summers. We always, in science, we tend to say you need 3 of something. So one piece of information is usually not enough. 2, you can see if something's going up or something's going down. That third one tells you if it's doing this, or it's still doing, it gives you a little bit more information than just 2 points or 1 point. So I would say, with knowing nothing else, gar are a competitor, but not necessarily a competitor all the time, and not necessarily in a way that's going to be bad, right? They're both they're both predators, but that doesn't mean that they're directly, like this gar's going to eat, this fish could be eaten by that bass or by that gar, because they do forage differently.
So yeah, gar are more opportunistic lie in wait predators, whereas our bass are ambush predators. They are going to go after something. So the likelihood of them actively competing for the same fish at the same time, I mean, it could happen, but it's probably less likely.
And we also don't typically worry about it unless the forage is limiting.
Yes.
So unless you're concerned that there's a problem with the amount of available food, there could be plenty of food to support both fish. So they could both be predators but not be directly competing for the same food. Turtle, it's harder to say. As an angler, when I was a young angler, I found turtles annoying because they would break my line. They would, they'd get into your, you'd have fish on a stringer in the water and they'd nibble on them. But I don't know that I could conclusively say that turtles are a problem.
I think it would depend on the number and the size and the species of turtle that you have.
But again, it goes back to that logbook.
Absolutely, yeah.
If you
recording what you see.
If you record what you see and you see continuous increases of gar and turtle going up and bass going down, then you probably have a problem. But just sort of as a rule of thumb, you can't say that.
Matt is asking, what design features would you include when planning a small pond, less than 1 acre? Are there ideal targets for depth or ratios of shallow to deep areas?
That's a great question.
That is a great question, and I'm going to plug the Ag Center Pond Construction Guidebook, available for download, and we'll make sure we put that in the chat. But there's actually schematics within that book that describe desired slopes that you want to have, depths.
Oops, hang on, sorry.
Depth features. But my advice is
not too deep.
Not too deep, and also leave some trees around it.
You need some some kind of structural complexity.
Yeah, I would strongly advise providing shading. It gives the fish a place to go during the heat of the summer to get out of the sun. Trees that overhang a pond will drop insects. There'll be terrestrial subsidies of food, as well as the leaves that fall in and branches that fall in feed for crustaceans and insects that live in the pond. So the pond manual will talk a lot about sizes and shapes and angles. My professional advice is to leave a good amount of trees and plants around the margins of the pond and create some access points so you can enjoy it, but don't have grass completely surrounding it. That's not a healthy pond.
Yeah, you still need some degree of shoreline vegetation. We have found that bass really like that, but it can't be completely covered.
Yeah.
Awesome. That was our last question. You got to show that room.
Okay.
That room is cool.
So the next part of our talk, we're going to go and we're going to show you a room of wet specimens, more fish, amphibians.
We can start here with some.
Yeah.
These are white bass, and here are some sunfish.
Oh, cool.
And this one's a little harder to see, but we have spotted bass in here.
Neat.
No, that looks like a redfish to me.
I was like, that's not spotted bass at all.
That's completely mislabeled.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah.
Well, that's a redfish, not a spotted bass, but that is really mislabeled.
So come on in here. So in here we have a large collection of teaching specimens. So we have reptiles and amphibians, we have a couple mammal specimens stuck in here, but mostly fish, and it goes through all these cabinets. And the idea here is to provide teaching specimens for undergraduate and graduate students to get hands-on experience with the characteristics that allow you to identify things. It also includes some pretty cool things like some rare and endangered species that you wouldn't otherwise be able to work with because you're not supposed to touch them, but you can touch these because we've already gone through the permitting process so we can have them.
A good thing about particularly learning from preserved specimens is that you learn how to identify a species away from color. So when you preserve a specimen like this, they lose a lot of the colorations they have except for melanistic or, dark features. So like stripes and bars will stay. So by learning a species like this where all the color is gone, you're taught how to look for meristic or number counts. So like we had said before, the number of fin rays or spines or the number of scales. So you're taught how to use things that will always be there instead of just looking at it and saying, I know this fish may be green.
So these fish are from the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. So it's not a fish that you would necessarily encounter in your life. You can't go hook and line for these guys. Mm-hmm. But by using collections like this, and we can teach students about them. So this is a different collection than the Museum of Natural Science here on campus. That's a research collection. That's the reference examples of what we call different species, so that when scientists have a specimen, they don't know what it is, or they have an unusual one, they go back and refer it to the individuals in that museum. So they keep that museum under somewhat restricted access, right? Because they have specimens out for the public to view, but that reference collection is curated by a group of scientists so that we have that information for answering those questions when things are difficult to understand.
It needs to stay pristine.
It needs to stay pristine. Whereas on a regular basis, 19 and 20-year-old students are dumping these out.
Well, as I just noticed, two fish that were in a
and
jar that were completely mislabeled.
Yeah,
so that happens.
And sometimes putting them back in the wrong ones.
Yeah.
That happens. But we have saltwater fish and freshwater fish. And it's a really great opportunity. I mean, we have little alligators for the students to check out.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
Here's our fetal deer.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, we have a question from Corey. If a trophy Florida bass, 10 plus pounds, is caught in the state of Louisiana, what would be the process of submitting it to the R&R department for research to find out the history and data on the lunker?
The best thing to do would be to contact your district fisheries biologist with the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. Starting there, and then through that biologist will be able to receive that fish. But yeah, it would work through the state.
Cool. That was the question.
Yeah, that's a great question because we are interested in those fish, but we're interested in doing it, as I mentioned from the beginning, and I've brought up a couple different times, this is being done in collaboration with our State Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. So we want to work with them to make sure they know that fish came from that location and that it becomes part of the sampling effort that occurs in that district. Because we want to make sure that the different districts are being represented in our research.
Cool.
But great question.
Cool. We can come back out, whatever y'all want to do. That was cool. I just wanted to show it. Ooh.
So I want to leave you guys with some final thoughts about bass in Louisiana. So during the 80s and 90s, the state record was broken and broken and broken and broken. But we've kind of plateaued. But I think this state could get bigger bass. There's no reason we can't. This state has great habitat. It's got a lot of different water bodies.
And our bass are really healthy.
And our bass, I mean, they're doing well. I mean, they're healthy fish. They're growing well. But there's something missing in this equation. And so I'm very excited that I've been talking with folks in our Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. They have some ideas about some modifications to the stocking program that might go on. We're going to continue to provide them technical information on habitat components and the genetic analyses. But I have a feeling that if these developments go well, we may see that record broken in the next 5 years. These changes that are very early in discussion. They're not changes that are being based on the information we're providing as well as research we're doing within the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. 5 years might be optimistic. 10 years, I'm really confident. I think we're going to start seeing the state record broken again. I think that we're on the cusp of some really cool lunker bass opportunities in the state.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think that our Lieutenant Governor's Bass Trail will get more people fishing in the state. The chance of us catching a new record increases with the more people fishing. I mean,
Absolutely,
you have to catch it to get the record. So I think that's also a great development, bringing awareness to the fantastic fishing we have here. This state is called the Sportsman's Paradise, and it's for a reason. There's great hunting here, there's great fishing here, there's great outdoor opportunities here. So I have a good feeling that things are going to change. We're going to go back to a period of increasing state records. I might be wrong. Might stay the way it is. That's not too bad either. So
Brandon's asking, what's the state record on a bass? Do you know?
Ooh, off the top of my head.
I think it's like
14-1 maybe.
Yeah, I don't think we've had anything over 15 or 16.
Yeah.
I think it's like it's 14, and it's from Caney, I'm pretty sure.
I think so. Yeah. At one time, it was one of the LSU lakes.
It was in 1990, right?
Yeah, 1990. Yeah.
It was the LSU, from the LSU lakes. Yep.
That won't happen again.
No, that will never happen again. They passed our heyday, but
yeah. That was a magical set of conditions. And that's the thing to remember about record bass, like George Perry's record bass from South Georgia, the world record. Mm-hmm. That was a particular set of conditions that are likely, you won't be able to go back to that spot and catch that fish again,
absolutely.
even if we knew exactly where he caught it.
Yep.
That's the thing about records. Everything has to go right. That bass has to live long. It has to have the right forage. It has to have great habitat, and it has to not be caught.
That's the big one. Yeah, it has to be able to avoid that.
Yeah, it has to be. Well, it can be caught and released, but not caught and kept. Yeah. So there's a lot of things that have to go right. But I do think there's opportunities for 15, 16, and 17 pound bass coming down the pipe.
Do y'all? Chad's just got a question. Do y'all prefer catching the biggest or the tastiest bass?
I think there are two schools of thought on that one.
I'm more of a. It's going to sound. I don't eat bass. I like to catch and release bass. I'm a catch and release bass guy. I love eating. I love eating sockeye. I love eating redfish, sea trout. But I'm a catch and release bass kind of guy.
Man.
Yeah.
I didn't expect that. Okay.
Yeah.
I always get that question about, did I eat any of my?
Oh yeah, we can't.
I get that question
we do not
all
eat our
the
research
time.
bass.
Did I eat any of the fish? And no,
we don't. We don't eat the research bass.
Also, often when I get the fish, they'd already been on ice for 2 days, and I think a lot of bass fishermen know that they're not going to be good. Bass are one of those fish that I think, and I do eat bass sometimes, not very often, but I'm gonna clean it and eat it. I'm not gonna let it sit on ice.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell them what links we will add after this is over to the comments? The pond guide.
The pond guide. Some links to logbooks that we can do. That recommendations for keeping your own logs.
Both of our emails will be in there.
We'll include our contact information.
Awesome. Y'all got any final thoughts for the public?
Well, I hope we have a weekend coming up. And I hope you all who participated in the live stream are excited about wetting a line this weekend and getting outside. This is the time of year where there's pop-up storms and things, but this is a beautiful time of year to be outside and catch some fish.
Do y'all stock ponds? Brandon's asking.
No, we do not engage in stocking ponds. There are a number of great private consultants that you can call. That will help you find a stocking source and make some recommendations.
And on that note, if you are interested in stocking your pond, make sure that you choose a reputable source for receiving your fish, so that you know that you're actually stocking your pond with what are considered Florida bass. You don't want to spend money to put bass that are already basically out there, native bass, into your system. So make sure you choose a reputable source for wherever you're receiving your fish that you want to stock.
Randy put in the comments that largest largemouth bass was 15.97 and 94 at Caney.
15.9.
I do have a question for you, sir. Yeah. I don't know if you want to answer, but it's the piranhas. What's up with that in the lakes? It's a hot topic.
So, fish don't fly. They don't drive cars. Fish eggs and small fish can be transported by birds, but a full-grown fish... Full-grown non-native fish usually arrives in a place by human actions or inactions. So we can't say, we don't know who the individual was that put that fish in there. We don't know that it was one individual or many individuals. Hopefully someone will be honest and come forth. But that fish arrived by human assistance or inactions.
And where was this, in case people don't know?
In the LSU lakes.
And it's a
red piranha.
So likely it's someone who had an aquarium, and the timing of finding at the end of the semester I don't think is very coincidental either.
Yeah.
It's probably likely that upon graduation someone had to empty a tank.
Yeah, but we can't say that for sure.
Yeah.
Likely, and also it's also to be noted that it is illegal to own piranhas in the state of Louisiana.
Mm-hmm. It's illegal at the state level as well as parish and city ordinances. It's really important, if you're interested in having aquatic pets or plants, that you, the consumer, become informed. There are state regulations, there's local regulations, but there's also ecological considerations.
Mm-hmm.
You need to know about the ecological status of that animal. Mm-hmm. Is this an organism, a plant or fish whose native habitats are being affected, or the native populations are being affected by this trade? You need to know about the invasive species potential of that animal. What happens if it escapes? These are things you need to know. The seller may or may not be informed. The seller might be from out of state. They might not know your local regulations. You can find red piranha on eBay, but that doesn't mean it's a good idea to buy them. Mm-hmm. Don't assume that a plant or a fish is dead and just dump it in the wild.
And even if it's dead, that doesn't mean it's okay to then dump because it is dead. That doesn't make it okay at that point.
Yeah. Many aquatic plants have propagules and seeds that can persist after death. Many fish will appear to be dead, but they can actually revive for long periods of time.
Or could be carrying parasites that are non-native to the system and then can drastically impact native fish.
Disposing in the sanitary waste disposal system is the best thing to do. But actually avoiding the problem in the first place. We have wonderful fish available in pet stores that are perfectly harmless to have in your fish tanks. They can be great. I've had fish in my office for the last 6-7 years.
Yeah, easily.
I like fish. I've had them at home. There are many good choices to avoid something that could be an invasive species. Mm-hmm.
John's asking, any comment on decline of fisheries due to introduction of grass carp? Is that a different topic?
That's a good topic for another live stream.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, John. We'll get to you.
We'll get to that.
That is a good question, though. That is a great question. Yeah.
That's a great question. It's difficult to quantify, but I think we all could agree, and from the scientific perspective, if we didn't have aquatic invasive plants and aquatic invasive mussels and aquatic invasive fish species, our native fisheries and wildlife would be healthier.
Absolutely.
That's a non-controversial statement I just gave you. I can't tell you how much healthier, but I can tell you they would be healthier. And these are things that we can really control. We control what we release, and we can control what we own, and we can control the fates of these things. So, it's unfortunate a red piranha was found. It's not the first time invasive species have been found in the LSU lakes and lakes just in general in the state. These are very preventable things. There's swamp eels now in Bayou St. John in New Orleans. That's not an awesome thing. They're going to compete with native fishes. That was an avoidable thing. They didn't have to be there, So yeah, that's I know it's invasive species are a really great different live stream. We can get a group of people and we'll talk all about invasive species.
I'll be on there too. I'll
Yeah.
do my thesis. Anyway, so final thoughts, y'all.
Go fishing.
Yeah. Catch a lunker and let me know where you find it.
All right.